It seemed unthinkable to the police that they would ever locate this Volkswagen camper van again. The owner was making practically weekly appearances at the station, pleading with them to keep searching. Something unusual was happening with this vehicle, that much was clear. When the police located the vehicle, they swiftly learned the truth about what had been going on inside. It seemed at first that the inside of the rusty vehicle was completely normal. Even of its obvious desertion in the woods for decades, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. That is, until they dug a little further into the vehicle's history. The owner's explanation for why he needed the vehicle back so desperately was swiftly debunked. He said the van had special personal meaning for him. The cops had always known he was making stuff up, but now they had irrefutable evidence. As soon as the cops addressed the guy, he realized his mistake. The intensity of his emotions, though, left him with no other option. What was in his car had to be returned. But exactly what was in the rusty van? How did the police track down the car, and why had the men desperately sought its return for decades? The local police had been becoming more frustrated with an elderly guy who visited almost weekly for years to inquire about his missing vehicle. He was curious as to whether or not they had already located it, or whether the search was still ongoing. The police always gave the same response. If somebody reported the van as stolen or sought to sell it, it would trigger a search for missing cars. However, this was not yet the case, and police officials did not anticipate this to alter very soon. None of them were making an effort to find the vehicle. They never got around to doing it since it took too much time. They attempted to tell him that several times, but he just wouldn't believe them. He thought that was really ridiculous. If so, why? When police asked him why he wanted his van back so urgently after being paid by insurance, he always said he had a strong emotional connection to the vehicle. The police station, however, was not convinced. Evidently, something else was going on with this vehicle. And although some of the police had become intrigued, they had resigned themselves to the notion that they would likely never learn the truth. The owner would never admit it, and it was hopeless to locate the vehicle. It had been lost for decades at this point, and if nobody had found it by now, it was probably withering away someplace. It may be broken apart in a scrap yard or lying at the bottom of a lake. The cops, however, would end up being completely incorrect. As it turned out, the vehicle wasn't as far away as they'd thought. In reality, it would come up on their radar as a matter of sheer chance. The discovery of the missing vehicle left everyone in disbelief. The moment has come to get to know that vehicle. A hiker passing through the area's woodland phoned the police to report seeing a beat-up blue Volkswagen vehicle. Informing the police, he inquired if they could do anything to get the vehicle out of the protected forest. The police officers, however, did not recognize the vehicle as the one they had been searching for. Initially, the cops really didn't give it any thought. The responding officer probably didn't realize the link right away, but when he ran the license plate through the database, he found a match. In fact, they had found the vehicle they had been searching for. If so, then what caused it to wind up at that spot? Eventually, they established that the vehicle was the one the senior citizen had been picking up on a weekly basis. All the employees at the station could picture the van from his detailed description. Something must be done, however, to get the van out of the forested area where it is illegal to park. In a flash, he summoned 2 other police officers to himself to share the news and plan their next steps. He had serious doubts about the issue and was eager to find a resolution. The procedure was very clear on how to handle this sort of issue. But did they truly want to adhere to it? Or rather, could they try something else? They need to quickly notify the elder gentleman of their discovery. But if their suspicions that anything is off with the van are correct, he will likely not want them near the vehicle. Therefore, a new strategy is required. What became of the battered blue vehicle must be discovered. So, they made a pact to keep the vehicle hidden in the woods, because they were curious as to the van's whereabouts and purpose in the woods. At least they got to examine it on their own terms. They planned to get it that afternoon, but were unsure of what they might discover inside. Taking the hikers' coordinates, the two cops drove their compact tow truck to the location. There were no roads going to this area of the forest, making it difficult to reach. Because of this, they will need to devise a strategy for getting to the compact region where the vehicle was discovered. Everyone was wondering what the guy was trying to find. But the question remains as to why the guy was in that protected wooded region, and what brought the car to that spot in the first place. Someone may have taken it and stashed it here to avoid detection. However, they pondered the thief's perspective, wondering what reward they may expect. The cops couldn't figure out what was going on. They investigated the situation and came to the conclusion that the vehicle had nothing to do with the mystery. The reason why the guy desired the vehicle so desperately was because he knew it contained something of greater value. Thus, the would-be burglars at the time were aware of the presence of a valuable item inside the car. However, nobody knows what was inside. They had a difficult journey, but in the end, located the vehicle. The blue color of the van contrasted sharply with the surrounding woodland, making its location instantly apparent to the police. They were mystified as to how it had eluded their notice for so long. They need to search the van's inside for any clues they may uncover. Within a few minutes, they realized the van's doors had been locked. Locks had deteriorated over the years, but with little effort, they were able to unlock the door. Now that they had the blue vehicle, they could more easily conduct their investigation, and they were eager to uncover whatever information they could. Moss had grown over the glass, so even though it was broad daylight, they had to use a flashlight to look inside the car. To discover anything out of the usual was a challenge. The reality was that they were not in the best of situations, what with the van seeming to be far beyond its prime. The hunt of the car was complicated by another issue. It was also important that they be able to give it back to the owner without him suspecting anything was wrong. The owner had no idea until that time that the company had located his vehicle. So, they devised an alternative strategy to guarantee a positive outcome. The best course of action was to have the vehicle hastily loaded onto a tow truck and driven back into town. They didn't want the guy to know they had his vehicle, so they didn't turn it in to the police. Getting better acquainted with the van's history is a current priority. The strategy was under strain since they failed to notice certain additional events. The elderly guy was a constant presence in town and a reliable source of information. That is to say, the guy was well aware of the goings-on in the woods at this point. This guy was obviously astute enough to keep his distance. He managed to remain near enough to see the cops as they moved a heavy object. It may be as big as a van. Since he opted to follow them, a showdown was certain to occur. The local police department decided to conduct their investigation from a neighboring village. This manner, normal police operations may continue without being disrupted too much. They did not have to wait long before their precautions paid off. There was plainly something the guy wanted to keep hidden. The strangest part was that he returned there every week to make sure the police were searching for the vehicle and was not scared to engage them. However, he was adamant about keeping a safe distance, presumably out of concern for what could be uncovered. As was previously noted, the guy didn't win many fans in the police department. One cop, though, was nearing retirement and could understand the guy. Officer knew the gentleman's pain since they had grown up together. Was he just a buddy trying to help out, or did he really know something? When the police officer realized where the vehicle had been taken and where it had been located, he realized the significance of the information in his hands. Both his honesty as an officer and his dedication to his old buddy were called into question. In order to avoid giving out too much information, He called the guy without giving any specifics about where the vehicle was. The guy said he did know, but had forgotten the clue while traveling. Although he appreciated the information, he recognized that the officer's covert knowledge was the only thing he really needed. The police had begun meticulously disassembling the van in an effort to learn the truth, while the elderly guy was anxiously attempting to find out where the cops had taken his vehicle and putting his senior officer pals under more and more strain. They were unaware that the guys already knew they had located the vehicle, or that time was becoming a critical factor. They were moving slowly because they needed time to reverse the van's route. It was a time-consuming procedure, and the police were becoming more agitated since they couldn't locate anything unusual. They were hoping against hope that they might uncover stolen gems, money, or even weapons. What the guy had that was so crucial that it had to be hidden from them. The police didn't realize their time was almost up, but they kept looking anyhow. The senior officer had given in to the gentleman's pleading after they'd revealed the truth to him, and now he knew where to retrieve his misplaced vehicle. In a panic, he bolted towards the outlying police station in the nearest hamlet. He could only pray that the police officer hadn't already located the information they needed. Otherwise, he wouldn't be needed, and the whole thing would be a waste of time. The vehicle was located in a secure location, and all of the senior police informed the guys of this. He did not elaborate on the presence of the vehicle or the police officer's involvement. However, the individual probably had a good idea of the cops' first impressions of him. It was obvious at this point that the vehicle itself was not the issue, but rather something within. There's no way a sane individual would go back at this point for the vehicle. Moreover, the gentleman suspected that his motivations were questionable at best. However, it would not stop him. As he entered the little precinct headquarters, he then saw the police officers dismantling his vehicle. There wasn't a lot of cover for their activities in such a cramped station. The guys jumped out of the vehicle and ran toward them, yelling at the policemen to halt. The two policemen realized they had been caught red-handed when they recognized the man's voice. They couldn't fathom how he'd tracked them down, but they knew they had to make a compelling case for their conduct or risk having to justify themselves to their superiors. The gentleman desperately wanted to outrun the police to his old, wrecked vehicle, but they wouldn't let him. The officer had invested too much time and effort to allow this individual steal a possible breakthrough from right under their nose. They could force the guy to fill out the necessary papers in exchange for the return of his vehicle, but it would require them to keep him away from his van. The workers, however, would simply insist that they not touch his vehicle until processing was complete. Neither of them wanted this to happen. The police and the guys sat down for a while to discuss the situation. Perhaps they might make an arrangement now that the man has revealed that he is searching for something in the van, albeit that object is not prohibited. As long as the police could verify what was in the van, the guy was free to go retrieve it. At this point, the males don't care whether the vehicle is totaled or not. In case the vehicle is still drivable at this point, it might be taken directly to the garbage dump. The police officers waited expectantly as the guys unlocked the van's glove box. It was something they had tried before, with the same result. Nothing unusual, but the guy didn't need any help getting where he wanted to go. He just took out a photo book. The guys didn't give it much thought, but tears eventually welled up in their eyes. The cops had handled the picture book before and didn't give it much thought. The guys had spent decades searching for something, but they finally found it. A photo book with the final images he had of his late wife. He never expected it to be taken, so he looked at it every morning before work in his vehicle. He really wanted it back, but he realized the cops wouldn't go to much trouble for a few photos. To keep the police interested, he devised a strategy to report the vehicle once a week, while keeping as many details secret as possible. He intended for them to suspect that the van contained contraband or anything of value worth investigating, and he was successful in this endeavor. Officers were frustrated, but they could do nothing to stop it. They had fell for the old man's perfectly legal ploy, and now they knew why he had done it. At least they won't have to put up with him every week anymore.